Anyway, welcome to the last day. Wow, time flies, right? So probably you will be happy to, have this as the last day as well. A lot of information. Hope you take some time to digest that information during the next days and weeks, maybe. Today we will talk about the third type of data collection, which I think is very dominant in the social sciences and when it comes to quantitative data. So we'll talk about content analysis and do some very basics again in the first lecture, we'll see how we go in time. Anyway, and then the next lecture looking at the practice of content analysis a bit more closely, and in particular reliability assessment, which is a big issue when it comes to analyzing content data. And then after that we'll have the examination and evaluation session, which we will be using for your presentations. I sent you an email again this morning. Try to make it short because we only have 1 hour for that. I'll make sure we really have 1 hour for that. And so there'll be one presentation after the other, really short feedback from myself in between. And then we'll have a session in which we hand over the certificates, right? Thanks for sending in all the assignments. I looked at them last night for several hours, as you can imagine. Some very, very good ones, some maybe more basic ones, but it was good to see that you all, one way or the other, try to engage with the contents. Some of you, I think, need to be more clever in terms of copy-pasting information from the internet. But I have just said that, and I didn't further consider that. Sorry. It is, yeah. It's, I think, just to give you, I know that sometimes contexts differ and academic contexts differ, but in my European context, some of the assignments I would have clearly had to fail because it was so obvious that information was copy-pasted from sources, and really copy-pasted, not even creatively rewritten, but copy-pasted. So, and that would, in my context, mean sending students to an examination committee, and in some of the cases probably would have been expelled from courses for several months up to a year. Just to give you a sense of, maybe different academic cultures also, and that's why I'm just mentioning it. I think that's what several people told me, that it's more common in India maybe to plagiarize. That's what we're talking about basically.
We had a vice chancellor in Quantitative University. I'm from one of the South Indian Central Universities. Our last vice chancellor claimed to publish 3 books, and 2 are not traceable, and the one is traceable, which is 98% plagiarism. Yes, she is removed.
I'm not giving any qualifications to that in this context because I know too little about the academic context here. I just wanted to give you a sense of, whenever you're doing international things, make sure that plagiarism doesn't occur. And especially if you at some point want to publish articles in international journals, these things, that should be your own word and your own words that you're using throughout the entire thing, and whenever you're using someone else's words or thoughts, reference to it. And some of you did that, right? And then that's fine. Some, I think, did. Anyway, that just as a few words in the beginning. Literature for today has been sent around yesterday as well. I think this is a very, very good piece to start with if you're interested in content analysis. And it outlines some of the difficulties and challenges and how to deal with them basically. And I think it's written in a very, very accessible way. This is a piece which is maybe a little bit less accessible, but it's important because, and we'll get to that, reliability is so important for content analysis, reliability assessments, and the field of content analysis has long been struggling with standardization of such reliability, and we're finally, I think, coming to a closure regarding that. And this article goes into this. We look a bit at how this process works today, but if you're interested in other literature about our coding scheme, which is similar to a questionnaire when it comes to surveys, for content analysis we use a coding scheme. How that is developed, this could be a piece to be looking at. And then I want to devote the last 15 minutes today to look at computer-assisted or automated types of content analysis, which is really where the field is going at the moment. And this, again, is a very accessible piece on some of the developments that have been going on in computer-assisted analysis. It's been written for journalism students and not for informatics nerds. So, this I think can be fairly easily be read. Just to give you a sense of the literature for today. Since we're missed half an hour now almost due to the camera business, I'll be really rushing through the first couple of slides now, because what the first couple of slides are doing is giving you a bit of sense of what the content analysis do. This, in a very simple sense, you all know word clouds, right? You've all seen word clouds, right? This is a content analysis word cloud. It tells you something about the frequency with which words occur in a text. The bigger words in the word cloud are usually the ones which are more frequently occurring than the smaller ones. And sometimes word clouds would work in a way that the most important words, the most frequently occurring words, are in the middle of a word cloud, and then the less frequent they come, they would be scattered around. Anyway, this in a sense would be the content analysis. This would be, when it comes to my field, media analysis, very classic type of content analysis. So we're looking at Time, Newsweek, US News, The New Yorker, news magazines, and we're looking at how much of their coverage was devoted to certain issues. So national news, international news, business news, personal finance, cultural, entertainment, celebrity news, right? That has been analyzed, all these content have been analyzed, people have been systematically going through these news magazines, and then you can compare the occurrence of national news. So you see that Time has a substantial share of national news has more, the New Yorker has very little, but therefore the New Yorker very much focused on entertainment contents, as opposed to some of the others. Right? So that's a very classic type of content analysis that you would read in many different types of papers, that you could put into a table or a nice graph, by the way, can sometimes be helpful. This is, don't look at the words too closely. This is word clouds of female and male young people in the United States, 14 to 18-year-olds, in their social media accounts. So people have been taking their Facebook posts basically of young people and have been doing word clouds, and then you see that females and males are living in very different mental worlds, if you want so, in that age.
Word clouds are being used.
Word clouds are not being often used in an academic sense. But I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're talking about, essentially. But many of the things that we do could easily be turned into a word cloud. And sometimes we're thinking about, it could be a nice way to illustrate your results if you use a word cloud. You can do a content analysis on facial expressions, which is often done nowadays, or more frequently done nowadays. So if it comes to the coverage of politicians and newspapers, you can code whether they portray positively or negatively certain expressions, and so on and so forth. And can do that for many other things. There's content analysis. You can take this very broadly. I read a content analysis about architectural structures, which would really follow the classic content analytical setup and take architectural structures as the data that we want to say something about. Classically, however, we're looking at text or pictures in content analysis, but that text and pictures could be taking various forms. Very quickly, history of content analysis. I should say, if I say content analysis now, I refer to quantitative approaches largely. And I know we've been discussing this, and that's a bit of a difficulty in the terminology here. Some would very much agree with that. Others would say that anything you do qualitatively, up to critical discourse analysis, would also be a content analysis. Yes, that's true. You're also analyzing content. I think the terminology, at least in the mass comm literature, is very much that a content analysis tends to be quantitative. And that's just for you to understand when I talk about this in the next couple of Berendsen and colleagues, 1941, first used the term really. Of course, this is much older. You know, there's rhetorical analysis by the ancient Greeks, and I'm sure there's interesting stuff here historically that one could look at. There were more or less systematic analysis, the first ones appearing in the 17th, 18th century, 16th, 17th century. After the advent of the printing press, it was much easier to distribute large amounts of materials through society, and churches and states, kings, emperors were very interested in knowing what there actually has been written in these materials, and therefore came up with more or less systematic ways to look at that. Then first well-documented content analysis in the end of the 19th century. Very important speech if you're interested in content analysis. Max Weber, German sociologist, proposed 1910 at this meeting of the German Sociologist Association that what is really needed is a large-scale press analysis to understand the influences of the press in current society. He gave a long speech on that, and very central, never realized though. So he came up with a great plan, but there was less interest, funding at that point to do so. I could send you the speech if you're interested in it. Yes, very nice. Can somebody take it over and remind me later? And then there's been scattered quantitative newspaper analysis around in the early 19th century again, rise of tabloid news. People were interested in what that actually meant, what this yellow press thing actually might be doing, and how it might be differing, and that's why people started to look systematically at content. And then in the 1930s, you know, economic crisis in Europe, rise of fascism, and rise of other media. All of a sudden, radio became much more important. Cinema became important as a source of information for many, and we see the emergence and more of an acceptance of systematic social science approaches in this time as well. And based on this context, basically, and I'm very quick here now, I realized that people came up with very systematic approaches to analyzing texts or analyzing contents. This still was very much geared towards press contents, really, and people like Lazarsfeld, Laswell really brought the field further in implementing types of content analysis. They were often interested in theoretically motivated concepts and their measurements of stereotypes, propaganda. I mean, that's the Laswell stuff, right? Laswell did a lot of research on propaganda in the first and second, especially in the First World War. Things were very dominant. At the same time, we see new statistical tools arising, having been used for the social sciences as well, which made the handling of these data easier. And content analysis also became, or at that time became part of larger research projects. Some of you, especially those from the political science side, must know Lazarsfeld's Erie County study, the first real study of elections, quantitative study of elections, 1944. Published 1948, I think. And what they back then already did, and what election studies are still doing now, is combining content analysis of newspapers with survey database. And back then they've been doing that very cleverly already. And then it took off. You know, Berendsen wrote the book, published a book in 1952, and it has been systematic approaches to content then have been spreading from mass communication contents to many other areas. We see in the 1950s already the first types of computer-assisted content analysis. Very interesting, people using first types of computers to do very basic word scoring, for instance, looking at what are most frequently used words, what are less frequently used words, things like that. Some interesting thing from Russia from that area, actually. And then, of course, exploded in the last 1 to 2 decades. Since there's so much material available now digitally, online, text that we can easily retrieve and use for these types of analysis, we increasingly tend to use computers nowadays to look at several types of content. What is this content analysis thing that we talk about? If you look at Berendsen's, I know this is hard to read from the back there, so I'll read it out. Berendsen's original definition from 1952, content analysis is a research technique for objective, systematic, and quantitative description of the manifest content of communication. Content analysis is a research method that uses a set of procedures to make valid inferences from text. Content analysis is systematic and replicable examination of symbols of communication which have been assigned numeric values according to valid measurement rules, and the analysis of relationships involving those values using statistical methods or describe the communication, draw inferences about its meaning, or infer from the communication its contents, both of production and consumption. So you see some things when you look at these and many other descriptions or definitions, you see some things coming back. It's a technique, it's described as technique really, so it's not in that sense something you just do out of the blue and however you wanted to do it. It's got systematic steps in here, it's systematic indeed, quantitative, and so on and so forth. These are, I think, this is the one I just read out to you. Neuendorf often used content analysis as summarizing. Quantitative analysis of messages that relies on the scientific method, that's in a second, and is not limited to the types of variables that may be measured or the context in which the messages are created. Scientific method, just to show that we're really talking about a very quantitative, positivist type of approach. It's about objectivity, which we all know doesn't exist, but what we try to realize here is intersubjectivity, and we'll come to that later a bit. You have a priori design, you know what you're looking for when you start a content analysis, and you don't just start reading and see what appears. You want reliability again, the validity of the construct. You want to ideally generalize from what you're doing and be able to replicate that maybe in different settings, test hypothesis. So that's the type of stuff that we do. Now this distinction between quantitative and qualitative sounds very easy to make. Krippendorf makes it a bit more complicated more recently by saying that I question the usefulness and validity of the distinction between quantitative and qualitative content analysis. Ultimately, all reading of text is qualitative, even when certain characteristics of the text are later converted into numbers. And he's right with that. If whenever we do a content analysis, whenever I have coders, people doing it for me basically that are trained, whenever I have those people look at texts, they make an inference from the text. They subjectively perceive the text and turn it into a number. I make sure that this subjective perception is shared among all coders and they perceive it in a way that I think they should perceive it. But it's still a qualitative reading of text. So, but the fact that we follow a lot of rules in this qualitative reading and try to make sure that it's intersubjective, reliable, and so on and so forth, and we do later turn into numbers, still has a very quantitative feel to it. And Neuendorf would oppose that in content analysis only one type of analysis measure, a technique presented as systematic and quantitative. So she opposes content analysis or contrasts content analysis to many other types of, more qualitative analysis such as narrative analysis, discourse analysis, for example. I'm quoting these two because they're really important in the literature. Krippendorf is kind of the grandmaster, the godfather of content analysis. He's still alive, still writing from time to time. If you're interested in getting into the field, his regularly updated book, I'm not even sure whether the last edition is 2013 or whether it's a newer one. He started in 1980, I think, with the first edition, is the resource for content analysis research. You had a question?
So is the kind of content relevant in making this?
Not really. We'll get to that in a second. Krippendorf then defines content analysis as a research technique for making replicable and valid inferences, replicable, systematic, intersubjective, and so on and so forth, from texts or other meaningful matter to the context of their use. Krippendorf makes it a bit more complicated because he says we can't read the text, whatever it is, without considering the context of its production. To give you an example, if I look at a transcript of a movie, it's going to be very hard for me, it doesn't make sense to look at this transcript from a movie with the same eyes as if I would look at a newspaper article. You know, there's a context in which texts, whatever those texts are, could be pictures or anything, are produced. And Krippendorff makes sure that we, in his definition, and he's the only one doing so, take into account that context of production of the text. I don't think it's very important for the practical things that we're doing, because we're implicitly very much aware of that. I just wanted to highlight this definition. So content, as it's defined, diminished content is contained in text. So text as such, and again we come to what text is, carries content. There's letters, there's words, there's combinations of words, so there's meaningful content in the text itself. The content could also be the property of a source. You know, looking at certain text will tell us something about the person who wrote the text, for instance. To make that very simple, we often look at differences between newspapers, tabloid newspapers versus broadsheets. And we assume that looking at the product, namely the newspaper articles, we can actually say something about the intentions, ideas, behaviors of those who produce the text. I'll skip to say more about this, but I hope got a bit clear. So content analysis in that sense should be unobtrusive, should be handling unstructured data. You know, text in newspaper articles, unstructured data, unfortunately. Can cope with large volumes of data and maintain context-sensitive method. So why do we do this at all? There's a question you could ask. And that refers to the last point just on the slide. If I want to say something about and sorry, I'm referring to things I work with usually. If I want to say something about the coverage of an election campaign in a given newspaper, and I want to write an article about that, I can't deal with 1,800 news articles in terms of describing what happens. I mean, it would be a very, very difficult endeavor to tease out information that's relevant just unsystematically from those 1,800 articles. If I've got a content analysis, I can say I'm interested in this and this and this aspect, and that allows me to just draw those pieces of information from those 1,800 articles and report those in terms of numbers, statistics. You know, or about the framing in an election context, or about issues, or about anything. So let's look at some of the conceptual things. This is small again, I'm sorry. So text, and that's very annoying, are not produced for scientific analysis. You know, the journalist doesn't write an article so that I can analyze it. And that makes it a bit more difficult to analyze text, actually. If that were the case, you know, they would follow a certain structure, they would always do this and this and this, it would be much easier for me. They don't do that. Photos are not produced for scientific analysis, whatever you want. These texts are meant to be read, interpreted, and understood by normal people, not by scientists. Again, very annoying, because there might be a lot of information in these texts that I, as a scientist, am not interested in, but that normal people might be interested in. Texts as such are not objective. The decoding of a text always is related to the one who's decoding, to the reader. Me looking at that picture in the back there, I'm decoding that picture probably very differently from most of you guys. Because you might know this person, might even see where he comes from, or what kind of group he might have come from, things like that, which I can't do. When I was visiting Delhi the other days, you know, Saima told me, oh, these people are coming from the countryside, and these people, and I don't know. How should I know? But you, of course, would see that. You would see signs, codes in their clothing, which could be, again, the text one could analyze, right? So text is not objective as such, but always depends on how it is interpreted by the one who's looking at the text. And what we try in content analysis is to make this interpretation as objective as possible.